Let's begin. Why don't you tell us your name and where you were born and the year?
My name is Lily Lerner, Lily Gluck Lerner. My maiden name is Gluck. I was born in a little village in Hungary, Tolcsva, and I was born June 20, 1928. And I live in Asheville, North Carolina at the present time.
How many siblings were in the family?
We were 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls.
And your mother and father?
And my mother and father. And I'm the second daughter. I have my sister, who's 2 years older than I am.
And what was her name? What is
Margaret.
Her name?
Margaret Gluck. My brother was Ignaz, and I had a younger brother, Ernő.
What do you remember about your early years in a small village in Hungary? What was life like there?
Today, in America, and then thinking back what was life there, life was so much different. The value of life was entirely different. The sense of values were different. Our family was a very close-knit family. There were only 100 Jewish families living in the village among the 4,000 non-Jewish people. And life was always, and anti-Semitism was on the surface, and we always knew that we were Jews. But however, we lived with that because we knew we were Jews. Life was beautiful. Ever since I remember. I was 3 years old when I went to kindergarten, and I always loved to be sociable. And I was picked to play Mary in a Christmas play. And I had an uncle, he was a rabbi. And I knew there would be some conflict, and I certainly couldn't say yes, whether I'm going to take part of the play or not. So I told them that I have to ask my mother. And my mother agreed that I should play because that wasn't necessary to be different. And I did play. And there weren't many Jewish children in the kindergarten. It was nice, and I remember that the things sometimes was very, very funny as today, because I remember the bread and butter that we had. Of course, we didn't have much butter. Once a week we had butter. And we used to like to dunk the bread into the sand for some reason. And then to bite in it, it was a cake. This was something that I remember. And life was beautiful, as I said. My mother and my father, the close tie, the relationship between our husband and a wife, I can only appreciate it even more today since I am married, because as a child, you really don't know what a marriage is like. But the way they understood one another, the way they worked with one another, and the emphasis that was on the family closeness, and each and every child was so carefully taken care of, and so carefully thought, and so carefully given everything, every little thing, of course, because there wasn't too many things, material things that the children could have. And I remember when Hamish Osir Beshvat, when you have to have certain, when you make a benediction on a certain fruit and things, that it was something out of the ordinary. When we had a little bag of nuts, peanuts, which is so common in this country, and we had a piece of chocolate, and then we had a piece of other fruit, or orange, or anything that was not available, a date. So my father sat down, and he took his little pocket knife, and he cut it in 4 pieces. So everybody should have a little piece, and one should not have more than the other. And we were waiting of Hamish Osir Beshvat, because there was some delicacy that we could not partake throughout the year. And so on and so forth. And the Passover, the Seder, it was so meaningful. And every Seder, when it rolls around, I always see my father.
Can you describe a Seder, one particular one?
Well, I could describe the one that my mother had a sister who was widowed, and she came to visit us at that time. And we sat down to the Seder. And of course, the Seder table wasn't as elaborate as some of the Seders today. It was a table, and it was a white tablecloth on it. And we had little plates and we had big plates. And of course, we didn't have as much dishes. So we used the dishes for the fish and turned it upside down. We ate the fish on the top. And then we turned it down, and that's where the soup was served in the inside. And my aunt came and she sat down and she says, "Isn't this wonderful that I'm here, even though that I am alone?" She just had one daughter. And she said, "I remember when we had the Seder back home, and I haven't been to Seders lately, just this one, because I didn't have the mental capacity to even to come." And she was saying the Haggadah, and she was reading. And I remember my brother, my younger brother, and he was saying the Manishtana. And then my older brother had a little drink of wine. And he was born the second Seder night, my older brother. He was born in 1921. And my mother was busy to go and see whether the soup is ready or the kremzeles are made. And my father was saying the prayers. And of course, we would not dare to say anything because reverence was something in that even we would never say anything that to disturb the peace or disturb the rituals or to disturb my father, because he was so dear and he was the father of the house. And even then, we knew that there's always one father, but it was just something that we cannot compare in today's life. And even it becomes more precious to me because I see the way life is today. And when he was saying the benedictions after the Seder, and the Birkat Hamazon, and the Haggadah, and all those words, every time that we have the Seder, it just rings in my ears. And even the holidays are so hard for me to celebrate, because I always remember the close family tie, that we sat together and around the table, and for hours and hours, there was no way of rushing. We had nowhere to rush. We had nowhere to go. The family was it. It was the entertainment. It was the movies. It was the love. That was what it was, the family.
What did your father do for a living?
We had a small vineyard, and we had also a small shoe shop. And my grandfather used to sell caskets, but we had some, but my father was kind of winding up that business. It was a very eerie thing. I always hated to go through that part of the store, and I was glad when he decided not to continue. So this is the business I used to go in. I remember I was 12 years old, and I went into the store and I told my mom, "Mother," I says, "I almost made a deal. The pair of shoes was supposed to be 10 pengu, and I asked for it 18, and I was negotiating with the customer. We were up to 12 already." And my mother said, "But Lily, this is not so. It's only 10 pengus." I says, "Well, Mother, I made 2 extra pengus." She says, "No, you shouldn't do that."
That's a good story. Tell me about your school. You went to what kind of school in your small town?
There were 3 schools. The Jewish school, we had our Jewish school, and it was subsidized by the government, and all the Jewish children went to that elementary school. We had 6 classes in one room.
Was that mandatory that all went to that school?
I really don't know whether it was mandatory. It was just natural that the Jewish children should go to the Jewish elementary school, because there were schools for everyone. And we had 6 classes in one room. There was only one room, and there was only one teacher. And there was only one Hebrew teacher when we had Hebrew classes twice a week. He was a very old man. His name was Lukács. He was a very disciplinarian. And of course, it was the most important because even though in the 6th grades, there were no more than about 55 students. But however, it takes concentration to be able to handle 6 classes. And I remember back to my 1st grade. I even remember the dress that I wore. I remember I had a black apron, and I had, out of that same material, made something for my arms up to my elbow to prevent, when you lean and you write in the notebook, so ink shouldn't get on the dresses, because clothes wasn't so available so easily.
Mm.
He was a very interesting teacher, thinking back today. All I know is that I strived for good grades all the time, and I accomplished it. And it was a good sense of accomplishment.
After the 6th grades, what was the opportunity then for schooling?
Well, I went and I made an examination to the middle school, to the Polgári. And from the 6th, I went to the 3rd Polgári, that maybe it's a high school. You could make an exam, or you can go from the 4th elementary school into the 1st high school. And of course, that wasn't in Tolcsva, that was in Sátoraljaújhely. And I studied by myself because we couldn't afford a tutor. And I went for the exam myself. However, some other children in the village had tutors, and they went every day and took classes and made their work. And my girlfriends had given me the work, and I did it myself.
So is that the school you went to afterwards?
Yes.
And what was that like?
Well, that was only, as I said, I didn't go to school daily. I did it on my own, and you had to go at the end of the school term, the year, and take the examination. So it was a twice trip, go to Sátoraljaújhely just twice, one for the written exam and one for the oral. And that was that, and it was a Catholic school.
What do you remember about the friends in your hometown, playmates?
My close playmates, the children from my school, we had no problem. I had a very good time, and their cousins had come from the bigger cities. In the summertime, we had a wonderful vacation. But throughout the year, the non-Jewish friends had some problems with them, because when we went to school, they were always waiting outside and heckle us and throwing rocks and always saying Jewish kids and dirty Jews. And I remember the saying, they had a little verse that it says, Zsidó megyen Bécsbe, kalács a kezébe, kértem tőle, nem adott, hátba vágtam, szaladott. That means that the Jew is going to Vienna, and she has a piece of challah in her hand, and I asked her a piece, and she wouldn't give it to me, so I kicked her in the back. And that was that. So things like that. And in the wintertime, snowballs, they always threw snowballs after us. And they put pieces of rocks in the snow inside, so it should hit when it hits a little bit harder. And but otherwise, as
how did you respond to this kind of behavior?
Our response, myself as a little girl, I had no stamina that I should be able to stand up against the boys, and especially the older boys. There was nothing to do but run. So the faster I could get out of their way, that was my aim. But life on a whole, you couldn't see real anti-Semitism on the surface while we were children, and of course I didn't know, because I didn't know what my father is encountering. He didn't speak about it. Perhaps he didn't speak about it wanted to shield us because we were small children, or he just didn't want to talk about it. But I'm sure there was, until later on, when everything came to a head. Then it was that it was brewing and boiling, and that's why it could succeed to such extent.
I see.
But it was, on the Saturday, we weren't allowed to put the wood on the fire, on the wood stove, so we used to stand outside and ask some friends to come in and put a piece of wood on the stove, and then in return we gave them a piece of challah, or just a thank you. And after all, we knew everyone. Everyone knew one another, because it was a small town, and our family was there for the generation. And everyone knew everybody, so there was no problem for people. Some people come in, some people refused to come, even then.
Was there a synagogue in your town?
We had a beautiful synagogue. and the women were sitting upstairs, and the men were sitting downstairs, and we had one rabbi, and we had a shamus, and the shamus used to go around and collect some money for the poor, and rabbi had a yeshiva. We had yeshiva boys from joining towns to come because he had a very good school, and we used to have those bocharim, days for
Can you
Shabbos.
tell me about that?
I remember that as my sister and I, we were looking forward the day when the bochar would come because we were girls and there weren't too many Jewish boys in town, and especially they were older. So it was something to look forward to get dressed or comb our hair especially. And my mother tried to have a better dinner as usual, which of course consisted probably potato soup and beans and noodles and cheese and such. Meat wasn't available during the week. We had a chicken for Saturday for the whole family. That was the meat. And for the high holidays or for Purim, then we had beef or a veal. Just the meals weren't so great like you can have meals here any day. As I said, the quality of life was so different, and the appreciation for the things that weren't available, perhaps, or for the things that made it maybe so special, and maybe that the remembrance is so special because so many years have passed by, you see, and we just go back to those years all the time, and with the thoughts that are so wonderful and so meaningful. We try to narrate today, but which is impossible.
Tell me about what happened before the war began, just as things were beginning to change. What do you remember?
Oh, it's not hard to remember. And I remember everything. My father came home. We had a town crier in the village. Of course, there were no news media, no television, no radio. Some people had radios. There was a town crier. He came out with his drum, and he beat on the drum, and everyone went outside the door and listened to the news. And he said, the laws have been passed that the Jewish properties are going to be expropriated from the Jews.
What year is this?
That was in 1938 and 39. And my father just couldn't bear the thought. He didn't believe it. He says, it can't be. He says, I'm a Hungarian citizen. My father was a Hungarian citizen. My great-grandfather was a Hungarian citizen. It's impossible that, why me or why anyone, especially us? And, but of course, the laws came out and they take the vineyards away. And the little fields, we didn't have that much. However, it was taken away. You weren't allowed to have it. And he said that we have to move because I'm not able to bear the thought that someone else should go and harvest my work that I worked all my life. And no one stand up. No one stood up. No one said, hey, this is not right. Why take it away? And those were the people that my father has fought in the First World War. They were the friends. They were the friends that they reminisced about the war, that they were talking about stories, that they came into our house for a cup of wine or a glass of whiskey because we were whiskey and winemakers and they knew that he has it. And in Europe, as you know, the language is not as the English language, that when you say you, that this is how you communicate with you and the president. But there, a friend, there was a first person, and everyone called my father on his first name. He never allowed anyone to call him or give him a title, because that's the way he was. And he said, all these people, no one stood up and said that maybe this is wrong and this shouldn't be done. But however, that's how it was.
And so this town crier announced in
So
38 the change.
Yeah, the town crier announced the change, and we had to comply with the laws. And they took our properties and they distributed among quite a few other people. And they didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know what to do with it. When the harvest came, they were all laying drunk for whatever they harvested. They didn't think of the tomorrow. All of a sudden, they strike it rich. It wasn't richness, however, that's what they thought. And
did you remain in that town when the land was taken away?
no, we went to live in Miskolc, in the city, because my father didn't want to live there. He said he can't take it. He has nothing to do there anymore, and he doesn't want to see the faces of these people.
Tell me about the preparation to move and the decision to leave.
Well, the decision was that it was emotional, and of course my mother agreed with my father, and he thought it's best for the family if we move. So we called a mover, and we packed our little beholdings and the furniture and put it on a buggy and a pulled with horses, and we moved into Miskolc. And we only had a small apartment, a 3-bedroom apartment, which was very small because in Tolcsva we lived in my grandmother's house, and the rooms weren't too many, but they were large. And we had a large yard, and we had fruits and fruit trees, and we had chickens, and we had cows. It was a life that it couldn't compare with that life already. Mm-hmm. So that was a lot harder starting then. Mm-hmm. But of course, it would have been okay.
Did your grandmother remain in her home?
No, my grandmother died when I was a very young child. I only remember going to her to see her on Saturdays, but she died a long time ago. And my grandfather, I don't remember.
So you were living in what was her house, though?
Yes.
I see. Do you remember saying goodbye to any playmates leaving?
Of course, I said goodbye to my playmates. And I told them that I'll be coming back and I visit at times. I didn't know whether I will be able to come back, but I felt that I want to come back. And we left.
What year?
That was in 1940. And living in Miskolc wasn't so easy itself. We had no income. So my father bought some cows, and we had milk, and we all learned how to milk a cow, and we sold the milk. And my father did some business of buying some wine and selling, and that's how we made our ends meet. We didn't have a savings account, or we didn't have life insurance. This just wasn't something that it was done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The war began in 1939 when Poland was invaded. How did this affect what was going on in Hungary in this town that you were living in?
It's very interesting. We knew that the war started, but of course we didn't know what's happening. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know what takes place in Poland. We didn't know what was taking place in Czechoslovakia. We didn't know anything. We didn't know. We only knew when we knew that Hitler came to be the Chancellor of Germany. The rise of Hitler and the propagandas and the harsh speeches, and it was frightening, but we didn't know. It may be unbelievable to you, but it was done in such a way. And I think back that how this was possible is just beyond anything that I could imagine.
There was no conversation at home in your new town when you moved, nothing about your parents, were they maybe aware of things and didn't share it with the children, do you think?
My mother always read the newspapers because the newspaper was the only media of learning what's happening in the government. And she always said that you wait, children, as the war was going. She said, America will come and will conquer Germany. It will conquer Hitler. America will come, and when America comes, it'll come like a road grader, and it's going to smash everything in minutes. But the trouble was that America never came, and America doesn't move so fast as we thought that they will. And I remember the pictures in the magazines when Roosevelt became the president of the United States. And my mother said, I like this man because he smiles. I like a president who smiles. Perhaps he's compassionate. And of course, she was wrong. But America never came.
Not for a while.
Not for a while, not for a long while, and not the way she thought they would. And of course, my younger brother was bar mitzvahed in Miskolc, and we went to that little shul. And on the way home, someone threw a rock in his head and made a big dash and disappeared. And so it was especially on a day of the bar mitzvah. And there was no big celebration like, bar mitzvahs are blown out of proportion in this country. And so commercialized, it was limited to the family.
Did you have family living in that town?
In Miskolc, we had an uncle. My mother's brother lived in Miskolc and his family. And we didn't have too much connection with them before. It's very interesting that in Europe, the families who were living in different parts of the country, even though it was a close distance, the thing of visiting one another was something unheard of because of transportation or because of occupations. It just wasn't there. And even though the family was close and we knew where the families are located, but when we went to a yard site, and that's when the brothers got together and the sisters, and that's when they met. Or if there was a happy occasion, a wedding in a family, we all went to the wedding.
Do you remember a wedding in particular?
Yes, I do remember a particular wedding. My cousin, this aunt who was at the Seder,
yes,
her only daughter, got married. And my mother has helped her to bring her up, and she supported her all the way, all the time. And my mother has given a share to make the wedding. And I remember she baked strudel and she made meals, so the wedding should have a big feast. It should be more food. We got together in Tokaj because my other aunt was in Tokaj, and my uncles, my father's brothers were there, so it was easier for us to go, and that was more centrally located. So it was a very big wedding, and she was very happy, and she was beautiful. And the family got together and we sang songs, and they sang Hungarian songs, and they sang Jewish songs. And it was such an event that it left really an indent on me. And I said to myself, my God, how beautiful would that be when I get married? It was beautiful when I got married, but the family wasn't there. And she, of course, she had 2 children and taken to Auschwitz. And she was burnt, that cousin of mine, because she had the baby on her arm. And then we went home, and this life continued. And when my father went to Budapest, he went occasionally because the business required that he bought some a barrel of wine, and he went to Budapest and sold it. And he had his old connection of the shoe business in Budapest, so it gave him a lift to take a trip from time to time. And every time he came back, he brought us chocolate. And the delicacy was a piece of chocolate and a piece of bread. Who would think of eating chocolate with a piece of bread today? And he had friends really that go back for a long time, even to childhood. And they always kept in touch.
Did you think of yourself in a patriotic way living in Hungary? But how did you think of yourself as Hungarian, as Jewish? As a child, what do you remember?
I was patriotic to the sense that we had the flags, and we sang patriotic songs, and we celebrated the national holidays. There were about 4 or 5 a year, and I recited poems, which was very patriotic, and I had no second thoughts of delivering a good poem, because my mother came and watched me when I was recited, and of course I didn't want to disappoint her or disappoint the community who witnessed that the children were performing. And we brought flowers and put it on the teacher's desk, and it was a real holiday. We were very patriotic. As I said, my father fought in the First World War in defense of his country. We were Jews and we were Hungarians. We never thought that this patriotism or being Hungarian or being Jews will separate the two.
When did you begin to see that it was a separation? Knowing that the fields were taken away, that was one incident. Further down the line, how did you see the separation?
Oh, well, further down the line, these laws came one after another. They were more severe. One was more severe than the other. The Jewish people were not allowed to have any domestic help. Of course, us, we didn't have, that it hurted so much. When we moved to Miskolc, we didn't have help anymore. And Jews were not allowed to be in public offices. And the Jewish stores were not allowed to sell leather bottom shoes because there were more profit in those items. And the Jewish boys were not allowed to be in the Hungarian army because they weren't counted as loyal citizens anymore. And they was not allowed to cut kosher meat. I remember I had a bicycle and I had to go out of town because there was a shachet who cut the meat. And for the Shabbos, I went out and I rode the chicken in. So, not legally. And anything that is just you couldn't function as normal people anymore.
What were your brothers doing during these days?
My father and my brother were taken into the labor camp. And
What
then
camp?
For some reason, it's just a labor instead of the army. You see, my brother was at age and he couldn't go into the army because they didn't want Jewish boys in there anymore. They weren't fit for the army. So he was in the labor camp, and for some reason they let him go out of there. I don't know why, but I remember one day when we were in Tolcsva, and they came to gather up the Jewish men.
Can you describe that day?
Yes, and my father said that took my brother. He says, let's go out to the fields and hide. Why should we go? And as they were going out, then one of his friends, he said, where are you running? I'm going to tell them that you're going away.
A Christian friend?
A Christian friend. And that time they didn't take my father and my brother. The reason was just to get at the Jewish men. And after they left the town, my father...
Who left town?
There was some policemen came from another city. They
To
gathered,
gather up
to gather some Jewish men. That was way before, my memory is quite shady on that. I don't know what the reason was. Well, anyway, after that, he went into the labor camp when we were in Miskolc. But that time, they were successful not to go with them. And when we moved and they were in the labor camp, my mother was always worried that my brother is not strong enough physically. He wouldn't be able to uphold, to the routines, because he thought that he wasn't so strong. But of course, a mother is always worried.
Mm.
He was okay, but for some reason they discharged him, and then he was in a ghetto with us.
How did they come and take your father and brother to the labor camp? And who came?
Well, there was a law that for what age, up to what age, has to go in and has to report.
What was the age?
Well, my brother was 21, and he had to go, and my father had to go. And then my father was discharged because he was older already. And my brother was discharged for some reason, and then he came into the ghetto.
What did they tell you about the labor camp?
Well, he told us about the labor camp, that they had to carry some rocks, and they had to dig, and it was really nothing anything that it was so beneficial for the country. It was just mainly to make them work hard and to make them realize that they are Jews and they are in labor camp and they're not fit for the Hungarian army. They had to wear a yellow band on their left arm. That was signaling that they were Jewish boys. And they had a hat that pertained something to the army. But that's all. And they wore their own clothes.
Mm-hmm. How long were they there?
My brother was there a few weeks, not too long.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when you said how life was in Miskolc, this life wasn't so relaxing anymore from the moment that we moved in. The unrest was there, and the air was just not restful. There was always something. We didn't know what it was, but there was always something. And I remember one time when the Polish, they said there's a train coming through Hungary with some Polish Jews, and we should take food out for them, and we did. But we asked them whether they know anything, or why are they here, or where are they going. They didn't know anything. It was just they were going somewhere. We gave them food, and we didn't know anything. We didn't know what happened, and I don't know what happened. There was the BBC, the English radio. It never said a word. There were the Zionist movement in Budapest and the leaders, and no one had let out any news, or no one knew anything. It was just unbelievable that, and at that stage of the game, it was so late. What
year are you thinking about?
Well, I'm thinking about really the years before the ghettoization began, actually. I'm referring to that. We didn't know what happened in Poland years ago, 1941. We didn't know anything about the Warsaw Ghetto. We didn't know what's happening, that they're taking people into the woods and they're shooting them. And we didn't know not one thing. We knew that the Jewish boys are in the labor camps, and that was it. And the properties were taken away, and we knew that we don't have what we ever had, the little bit that we had, but we made ends meet, and we lived. So the air was frightening, and it was fearful. But no one did anything. No one knew what to do. I remember one time my father said that perhaps that I be family and emigrate to Israel. And I know he was working at it, but he never succeeded. What was it? I don't know. Was it financial, that he couldn't meet the finances, or was it political? I don't know, but I know I heard that they were talking about that they would like to move out to Israel to take the family, but it just wasn't possible.
Did you know anyone that did emigrate, was able to leave?
No, I didn't know. personally, I understand that some people emigrated and some people fled to Switzerland and from Budapest, but as I said, in the smaller towns especially, it was just so far away. And it's amazing that the whole Hungary is so small in size that North Carolina is much larger, and how people didn't know.
What did you know in 42, then 43? How did you find out what was the plan in Germany for the Jews?
Well, when Hitler's army came into Miskolc in 1943, March 19, they marched down the streets, just a few tanks and a few soldiers. And I had a little dog. He ran out and they killed him. And when we saw the tanks coming, we were just frozen. We didn't know what to say. We didn't know what to do. And then my father said, I think that you ought to go back to Tolcsva. Perhaps the people that know us, maybe they would help. And it would be better for us if we go out of here and go back there. And we did go back. We did go back there, but it didn't help. We got on the train the following night. And my father remained in Miskolc because he said that maybe he wants to liquidate, and get rid of the cows and just do something that a man has to take care of. And he will come after us. And we went back to Tolcsva. And my father came after us and we stayed there.
What were you thinking going back to your small village?
I was thinking that, as my father said, that maybe they will help us after all. Maybe they would protect us because they know us, and maybe they love us. Maybe they have something in their heart that I didn't know what was awaiting or what the result will be as of the German occupation. We knew everything that was taking place in Hungary, and that the government was fascist and everything was against Jews, that was done against Jews, but we didn't know what's going to happen when actually the German occupation will bring. So, and to tell you the truth, I didn't have this fear of that they're going to take our life away. I never thought of that. I thought all these things that's being done, it's enough, like they say, die in. And I thought that's going to be the extent, because I was barely, 16 between, and as a 16-year-old, I was a lot more innocent than a 16-year-old today. We didn't know as many things as the kids know today. We were sheltered and we had no knowledge, and there was no communication with the outside world. It was just unbelievable. And we went back to Tolcsva, and we stayed there, and there was Passover. And the day after Passover, the town crier came on the street again. And in 2 hours, every Jew in this village should get ready, because the policeman is coming to you and is going to take you away. And that was that.
What did you do in those 2 hours?
It was the day after Passover, and the Passover dishes, were still on the table. And it was early in the morning. Our clothes were laying over the chairs. It wasn't put away. And my mother said, maybe we're going to work. That this hope of a human being, this hope that maybe something is not going to happen, It's actually like putting your head into a haystack, and know that it's not that the lightning is not going to hit. But of course, there was no conception, because, as I said, it was something that no one thought of, that our life was threatened just because we were Jews. We were honorable people. We were honorable citizens. We were contributing to the community. We were contributing to the welfare of the country. You know, in generality, everybody. And we never thought of that this is going to come to this. And of course, we didn't know what's happening in Europe. And this was inexcusable for somebody's part, because somebody should have let us know. So in 2 hours that we just gathered just very minimal things. And
what did you take?
I've taken a little prayer book with me, and I've taken some pictures that I had, and a school book, and that was all. And they came, and we were standing outside in a yard, and they took our cows, they led it away right in front of our eyes. This are sort of friends, you know, that they made believe that they were our friends. They ran into our houses and they grabbed our clothing that was on the table. They grabbed the dishes and they ran. They were looting while we were standing there. It was an unbelievable sight. And I told my mother, I says, why is this happening? What did we do? She, of course, she didn't utter any words. There's nothing that she could say. There was no words of encouragement or no words of sadness, because she didn't know, you know. So when they were coming to take us, had we known that what's happening, I mean, there were strong boys among the Jewish people. Of course, we had nothing to fight with but our shoelaces. My father was in the war, and he had a pistol that he brought home, and he buried that pistol. And I remember I was quite young then, and I says, why do you bury this? He says, I bury it because, God forbid, I don't want that an accident should happen, some child could get a hold of it. He says, the Jewish people are not used to having weapons in the house. It's not allowed. And I'm going to bury it because we're never going to need that. And they came and they told us to go with them to the schoolyard. Even, you know, we had hatchets, we had shovels. My father was a strong man. Had he known that this is the last of his journey, I mean, some people could have just fight those two policemen. After all, you know.
Were they Hungarian policemen?
Of course, they were from that same village, the Hungarian policemen. What they looked like to me then, they never looked too good to me, but that uniform, that yellow uniform, and with the feather in his hat, you know, curled, and then the look on his face. And I remember I felt, but I didn't at the time. I was going to the post office one Sunday afternoon. You had to go and pick up your mail. And it was a nice pastime to go to the post office, you know, to pick up the mail. And I saw a man bending down and picking something up. He was one of the guys that had the, you know, who put the horseshoe on the horses. And he and the man from I remember the man from the bank. He was taking his deposit, you know, to the post office, and he dropped the bag, and I saw that he lost the bag. I didn't know what was in that bag. I assumed that was money because he worked for the bank. And then the housekeeper from the police, all they had is housekeepers. I don't think any of them, maybe one of them was married. And this housekeeper cooked the food for all the policemen. Her name was Erzsi. I never forget her face or her look. And she went down, and she bent down, and she picked up this bag of money and took it in, you know, in the station where the police were. And the man from the bank was running back from the post office. And he asked me, Lily, did you see anybody pick up a bag? Because I lost my bag. And he was frantic. I says, yes, I certainly did. I says, Erzsi picked it up. And he was so thankful, you know. He said, you just saved my life. He was so thankful that I happened to see the bag and I happened to see who picked it up. But of course, he forgot that too. So when the police came, I just had the feeling that I ought to tell him. I says, he remembered the day when I reminded Friedrich to pick up his money bag, and your Erzsi picked it up, and she would have never told him that she did, you know. Most of those police were from the criminals, you know. They came out. They were very brutal people, that type of police. And nobody, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know what is going to help, but I didn't know what. But I had that in my mind. And they took us to the schoolyard. And our sort of friends were standing outside and applauding and laughing. And at the schoolyard, they came with the buggies. And they made us get in the buggies, in the wagons. And there was one man sitting. And there were about 15 people in each buggy. And then the procession started to take us to Sátoraljaújhely. Sátoraljaújhely was the capital of Zemplén. And this acted as a magnet for the 52 villages around, you know, to bring the Jewish people into the ghetto. And there they told us they're taking us to Sátoraljaújhely. I didn't know what or ghetto. And no one was there to say a word, you know. We stood there like, you know, just frightened sheep. And then, you know, we were already by then reduced to, you know, to almost to zero, because everything was taken away and the emphasis was everything against Jews. So we just were speechless.
And you had no idea
We had no idea.
Going to.
We had no idea what's going to happen, or where are we going, or what is going to befall on us. And as thinking back, you know, sitting here now, I mean, that one man that was leading that buggy certainly could have done away with him, you know, and run away in the hills. Perhaps some more people could have been saved or survived, not to mention the fact that if the people who know us certainly would help to send us away and not to help us to survive, because that's how they acted. But something could have been done if everyone knew that we're going to be killed, or this is the end, or are we going to be gassed and exterminated and being mass murdered. So that one man and the few buggies, they rode us into Sátoraljaújhely, into that one house. There were about 20 families in that one house. And one family was given a straw sack. And our whole family was sleeping on that sack. And there was one kitchen in that house.
How many people were you altogether?
About 20 families. And the means of keeping clean was not so good. There was one, you know, sort of bathroom. It wasn't a modern bathroom. And there was a well and there was water, so you had to stand in line to get some water to get washed.
When you arrived there, what did you see?
When we arrived there, we saw a bunch of people. You know, there were people from all over in these 52 villages brought in already. And we saw the fence around the neighborhood. And
barbed wire fence?
Barbed wire fence around the neighborhood. And these kind of police walking around, the csendur, they call them csendőrök, and guarding the people. And I said, what is this? You know, they said, it's the ghetto. I said, ghetto for what? I said, the ghetto for you. And that was that.
What did your mother say, or your father, do you recall? How they responded?
My mother always said that God will help and something will happen, but we don't know. That's what she said. She always said, we don't know, because no one knew. she was such a righteous person, and it really wasn't right that a person like her and the others, but to me she was the most.
Mm. What was your first day like in that ghetto?
The first days was getting situated, and it didn't take too much because we only had one straw sack to get situated on. And we were told that who and what time could, if you have anything to cook, to take your turns to cook some meals. And we were in a ghetto from that day on until the day after Shavuos. And we started to function a ghetto life.
What was that like?
The ghetto life was like that. There were doctors in a ghetto. Everyone was in a ghetto, and I volunteered to be a help for the doctor, to go around and watch the sanitation in the ghetto, and check the hairs of the children, and everyone, the small children that had long hair, that we should cut the hair, so they shouldn't, lice get into their hair, because keeping clean was quite hard. And I remember the doctor has given me a white kerchief, so I should be, identified as a helper, so I could go all in every part of the ghetto. So we went in the mornings and we checked for lice and we checked for cleanliness, and we begged the people to try to keep clean, because it's most important. And the rest of my family remained in the ghetto. And then it was about early afternoon when I returned. And I remember my brother always, there was a yard, and he said, you don't have a Jewish face. I should go and run away. I should go out of the ghetto. I shouldn't stay there. And I said, like many others, that whatever is going to happen to my family will happen to me. We were thinking of something is going to happen, but we didn't know what. And my sister's tonsil was removed in a ghetto on a chair without any anesthesia 2 days prior to going to Auschwitz. And I went home one time to Tolcsva, home, I'm calling it home, and tried to get some flour. And I remember I had I had an identification paper from our domestic help, and I didn't look Jewish, that's what they said. So I got on the train and I went to Tolcsva, and I had some money and I purchased some flowers. No one asked me what is the purpose. No one asked me how come I have to come back here to buy flowers. No one asked me where my family was.
How did they treat you?
Just indifferent, like I was a stranger, total stranger. So I got the flowers. I was glad. I don't know why I went there. I could have gone out just in the village, but I guess I felt that that's where I have to go. And I brought the flowers, and I remember my mother baked a cake for Shavuos. And she said she knew I loved stuffed cabbage, and she said, there's no cabbage in the ghetto. She went out in the garden and get some leaves. And she said, I'm going to make some cabbage for you in these leaves. And I remember we had a tomato soup for Shavuos, and those leaves stuffed. It wasn't meat. It was rice and something she used. But it was delicious. And that was our last holiday meal. And I went out from the ghetto occasionally. And of course I had my yellow star. And I had a pocketbook, and I put it over my yellow star, and I just walked by. I didn't take the star off. I felt if they put it on me, let it be there. And the Chender used to say, where do you think you're going? I said, I'm going because I have to go get something. He says, what do you think? I know you're Jewish. I know you have a star. Move your pocketbook away. You can't go anywhere. I said, I have no star, and I'm going. I didn't say whether I was Jewish or I wasn't, and I just walked by. So it just goes to show you, if someone wanted really, if we would have known our fate, and we could have gone out of the ghetto, several people, and we could have been save ourselves had we known. I've been out of the ghetto and I came back in the ghetto several occasions. But I had no intention to stay out of the ghetto because my mother and father and my brother and sisters were there, and no one else meant anything to me. Not the country, not the scenery, not the village, not the town. Had no meanings.
So we were just discussing that you went back for some flour, and your last meal, the shavuos, the cabbage soup, the tomato soup and cabbage with rice. Why don't we pick up there?
Yes, and my mother said that maybe next time I'll be able to have some meat in it, but this would do this time. It was a delicious meal, since we didn't have for 6 weeks too many cooked meals in the ghetto. And I always loved to eat. My mother was always worried. I was running home and I always said, Mother, I'm hungry. What's for dinner? She said, all you say is you're hungry, and what's for dinner? You never see how it's being done. What kind of a barbosta you'll ever be. Anyway, this was the last meal in the ghetto. And by some manipulation, my father has arranged it that we should be in the third transport. So the first transport left, and as I said to you, you weren't allowed to go to the other parts of ghetto to visit. If you were in a ghetto, you just had to stay there. You couldn't even go out of the house.
How was it announced that it was time to leave? How did you know?
The police came again, and they read out a list of names. And they read out a list of names, and they said, this person and this family is going to be in the first transport, and the transport is leaving in such and such a day and such a time.
What did you think when you heard transport? What did that mean?
Nothing. We didn't know. We didn't know. The hope was always there. Now, maybe it will be worse, or maybe they're taking us to work. My mother has baked some cookies, so in case we are going to work, so we should have some cookies, some sweet stuff, so give us some energy. And I remember that when the first transport went away, as I told you, I was allowed to move around in the ghetto because I was a helper. I went to see where my uncle was, from Tokaj, and everybody was gone. No one, not one family was there, and the house was boarded up. It was a horrible feeling. And I had no knowledge. I stood there and I looked at the house, boarded up, and empty and lifeless. And I just couldn't imagine what happened to them. I couldn't imagine where they have been taken or what happened. All I knew is that they were gone. And I remember going back, and I wouldn't tell my parents what I've seen. And my mother asked my father, did you see my brother today? And I said, yes. I didn't want to tell them that the house is boarded up and no one was there, because I felt that it's not going to help anything, and I'm not doing anything, so I might as well say nothing. And then the second transport was left. The same thing happened. And I went out to check the people, and the people weren't there. And as I said, and I knew that our days are numbered. I mean, how much longer, or it has to be some kind of a miracle that it shouldn't happen to us, even though that it was such a tragic feeling that you didn't see the people anymore, that they were gone. So the police came to our yard, the two of them, and they read out the list. And that dreaded moment arrived. Our names were on the list. And they said in the morning, you have to come out here on the yard and line up. And don't take anything with you, what you can't carry. Anything that is not personal, it's not necessary. So my father made a little blanket for my brother. My brother was born in 1930. And he lined it with a warm lining. So in case we're going to work, and he rolled it up like a backpack, and he put straps on the shoulder. And there was no other material that he could have made for someone else too, but made it for him because he was the youngest. And we were so happy that Ernőke will have a blanket in case it's cold. Put it on his back. And when we were taken to the train station, before we had to go to another center in the ghetto where they checked you, you know, everything that you had on you person.
What did you take?
What you're taking. Because they said no jewelry, no money, not anything. You don't have to take anything. And of course they didn't believe you, they had to check you.
What did you take with you?
I just had my little prayer book with me.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I took. And the police went and tore the little blanket off my brother's back and threw it away. And he said he wouldn't need that. And I saw my father's face, you know, it just killed me. And he tried to get it back. He tried to sneak over there and get the little blanket back, like he felt there was a sense of security. And he hit him so hard on his back. He just let out a moan and he couldn't get the blanket. And they walked us to the train station. It was petrifying, that procession, walking on foot. Just a mess of people, and children and old people and sick people. And as I said, my sister just had her tonsils removed. And my mother was so worried. Actually, the worry of my sister took away the worry of the happenings around us from her. Perhaps it was good. And we arrived at the train station. We were put into the cattle cars. I always wondered that why, you know, when I was studying history, and I was studying the Hebrew history and our everything, you know, our origin and where we come from, and when I read the miracles, the parting of the Red Sea, and on and on and on, and Moses having water come from the rock, and then I just looked around, you know, I was waiting for some kind of miracle. I don't know why I was waiting for miracle, because I guess that's the only thing that I had in my mind, you know, that I have studied miracles. I just couldn't, I couldn't explain what this whole situation is and what this scene is about, you know, the cattle cars and the bunch of people, innocent, harmless people, you know, gathered around in rows and putting in trains. And I was waiting for my turn, that when my family has to go into the train. And of course, there was no miracles. And then it just reminded me of the time I says, I wish that I could witness a miracle. It would be great. But then we were put into the cattle carts. Even on the little window on the left-hand side, up above, you know, for air, was wired with chicken wire. Even that wasn't enough to escape for anyone, or anyone wouldn't even have the idea to escape, because no one would have, you know, these people of ours were so I don't know whether we were ignorant or to the greatest extent that a person shouldn't think that maybe the life is threatened. I certainly didn't think so, but people, older people, you know, when you become older and when you become more experienced, you tend to sense some sort of paranoid, and you worry for your life. Not when you're young, you know, you have no fear, even though that there is, you have to have fear. But when you're young, the young people have no fear, so I had no idea. The fear for my life was totally non-existent for me. I never thought of that. So we were put into the cattle cars, and they said, sit on the floor. Sit on the floor, sit on the floor. There's nothing that you could say, or there was no one to talk to. And there weren't even German people doing this. They were the Hungarian genders doing that. You see, when Eichmann came into Hungary, he was worried that the Hungarian Jews are going to revolt because it was so late and the war was almost finished. And he was scared that the Jews know what's happened, and they know exactly what it is, and they know what's happening with them, that they will revolt. No one revolted. No one did anything. No one knew. And we sat down in that car. And there were a barrel in the middle for toilet facilities. And it just was so many people. And it was warm. My mother sat down and she put the little baggage of cookies that she had. And she said, we will not try to eat this while we're in the train, because we're not active, we don't have to eat. Maybe they're taking us to work, even that. I don't know where the idea of work came from. I wish the idea came that they're going to kill us and let's do something. But no one had that idea. She said, let's save the cookies in case we're going to work, so we have a bite to eat. And we sat down, and there were babies in that wagon, and sick people and old people, young people. There were about 150 people in the wagon. And after they jammed us in there, they closed the doors, and they locked the doors. And that was that. And the next day, when the train started to go, the people were crying, and you know, I held myself back not to go to that barrel, because I figured the less of the stench, then the better it is, because there's so many people in there. We were 3.5 days in that wagon. And they were crying, and they were pregnant people, and it was just horrible. 3.5 days in the wagon. Except one morning, they opened the doors and they were giving us some water. And we saw Jewish boys running about with a yellow armband. We weren't allowed to ask them anything. They weren't allowed to talk to us. Although some people yelled, where do you think they're taking us? Or what do you think is going on? There was no answer. They weren't allowed to answer. And then they closed the doors, and that was that. My mother was praying. I had the prayer book, but I couldn't pray.
What was your father doing?
My father was just sitting there, and he says, maybe I could have saved my family. Why didn't I do it? Why didn't I do it? But of course he couldn't do it, because if he could have done it, he wouldn't have been there. And then the doors opened. It was middle of the night, on a hazy morning, on the tracks, on a station without a name. It had no name. I didn't see any name. The doors were opened. They said, heraus. We saw German soldiers, shining boots and a spotless uniform, and us being in that wagon, filthy and drenched and overheated and shocked by fear. They said, out of the wagon, fast. The faster the better. And the wagons had no steps. You know, it was a high jump to go down for old people and young people alike. So some fell, some tumbled, some fell, some came down. Got off the wagon, they said, leave everything in that wagon. You wouldn't need a thing here. You would be getting TLC, tender love and care. You will get everything. You wouldn't need anything. Just leave it there. All your belongings. I was still holding on to my little prayer book. We got off the train and they said the women on one side and the men on one side. And that's the last time I saw my father and my two brothers. They were separated. I didn't even have time to say goodbye to them. And then my mother was, my sister and I. My mother was between the two of us. And we were standing in the line. And we saw a table on the far end. And that was Dr. Mengele at the table with his monocle in his eye and white gloves on his hands. And for some reason, again, the human instinct is something unheard of. You know, the feelings, the ESP or whatever it is. My mother took the kerchief off her head and put it on my head. Because I was, you know, barely 16 and I even looked much younger with rosy cheeks. And she probably has seen that people do this, you know, ahead of us in the rows, and maybe she thought that's protection for me or something, I don't know. She put it on my head. She says, there, so you should look older. And when we came to the table, my mother was in between the two of us, and even today I feel if we just stood, you know, make believe, not on either side of hers, maybe he wouldn't think that she was our mother because she was so young. She could have lived. But then it was even more passion to tear a family apart. It's not enough that everybody was on the same fate, but it was more passion to inflict some more hurt, you know, to the greatest extent. So Dr. Mengele said, I didn't know his name then. You know, with a flick of the finger, he said left and right, and you know, pointed to my mother. He said, you to the left. She was a beautiful woman, young. And that was the last time.
Do you have a tissue?
And my aunt was going with her. And my aunt collapsed on the tracks. And my mother was trying to lift her up. And a German with a rifle butt was hitting her. She should just leave her alone. Just motioned her to go on. She turned around and she waved. And she says, children, you're going in the front of judgment of God. I said to myself, what are we going to be judged? What have we done? And that was that. We remained in the row. The German soldiers were walking up and down and up and down. We were in a row of fives by then, in a roll call. And he said, don't worry about your parents. You're going to see them on a weekend. Don't have to worry about it. Arrangements are made right now. You'll be taken care of. You will get meat once a week. Nothing is going to happen. You have nothing to worry. Such lies, such education, such instructions to human beings against another human being. That could be done. And it was done. And then they took us into the Lager Sea.
What was the name of this place?
Auschwitz. So from that row we went into a bathhouse. And they told us to get undressed. You could imagine at the age of that time and being so innocent. And someone tells you to get undressed naked. Strip everything. I said to my sister, I will not. She says, you have no choice. So when it came to our row, we had to get undressed. We threw the dress in one pile. We were instructed. Everything was so organized with precision. Throw the dress in one pile. Throw the shoes in one pile. Anyone who had glasses, throw your glasses away. They took my earrings out of my ear. That was put in there because when a girl child is born in Europe, they pierce their ears automatically. I had a little red ruby earrings from birth. My hair was down to my waist. I had two, long hair in what do you call it?
Braids.
Braids, that's right. And my sister had long hair in two braids. She even had a lot more beautiful hair than I had, but thicker hair, but we both had long hair. Threw your panties in one pile, your socks, whatever you have. And I looked around, I turned back, and I was standing there naked. And I thought that the whole world had undressed. I have never seen so much clothes in my life. Mountains of clothing. And the people disappear. And I said, where are the people? Who are going to put those clothes back on? And of course, there was no answer. And we had to stand in a single row, form a single row. And there were German women soldiers with clippers in their hand. First one with a big scissor that clipped our braids, and then the other with a clipper, and they shaved us bald. Well, I can't begin to tell you the sight, what it looked like, you know, when you see thousands and thousands of bored people. My 2 cousins were there, my sister and I, and we were afraid we couldn't recognize one another. I mean, I have never seen my sister bored or myself. And we right away said that we're going to give a signal so we shouldn't get lost, who we are, to keep together. It's just amazing. Again, the portrait of the human instinct. They shaved us, we looked like maniacs. They shaved us everywhere where there was hair or pubic hair under the arm, and you had to lift your arms up and turn around in front of the soldier. They had to see whether your skin was without blemish, because if there was anything that they could point that it wasn't useful, then you just automatically was sent to the death. And after that, we were motioned into a room and made to sit down. There were about 3,000 of us sitting in that room. The heat was just so extensive. And there was no room. We were just sitting on the floor, you know, very, very close, naked, bald, frightened. And you weren't allowed to say a word. The German policewoman, the German SS, the Aufseherin, and they called them. They were walking up and down with a whip in their hands. Ruhe, Ruhe, you know, quiet. You got to be quiet. So we didn't know what's going to happen. My sister started to faint. I didn't know what I'm going to do. You know, for some reason I always felt that I'm the stronger and I have to look out for her. I noticed there was a faucet on the end of the room. I said if I could only manage to get there somehow and get some water. And I started to move around and I managed. And I brought some water. How much water left in your arm when you get back? And I washed her face. She was okay. And I don't know how long we sat there. And then they said, up. And they motioned us into a room with shower heads. And we got a nice cold shower. After sitting there for hours and hours and overheated, it was so cold. They were so considerate, giving us a shower to cool us off. My sister said, if you're not going to get pneumonia now, you're just lucky. Because I had double pneumonia when I was about 10 years old and I was very sick. She was so worried. She wasn't worried about herself, she was worried about me. And after the shower, we were motioned out again and handed a single dress, a gray striped dress. No shoes, bald-headed, and there was a number on the dress. It was a long number. I never learned my numbers. I refused to learn my numbers. And we were put on outside, taken into Lager C in the gypsy lager, and made staying outside all night in a roll call. You weren't allowed to sit down. We stood there for 3 days. And the sight in Auschwitz, I mean, my sight, what I have seen, there were heaps of people and barracks and wires, electric fences, Germans, in shiny uniforms, and German women. And of course we didn't see any men. And we saw a stack of smokes from far away. We didn't know what it is. And there were Polish girls who were the helpers of the Germans, who've been in Auschwitz for years. And then we tried to ask them, some of us knew German, that what happened to our mothers, or what happened to the people who were separated. She says, "Are you stupid? You still don't know? Look at the smoke. That's where your mother is. They've been gassed and they've been cremated." And we couldn't believe it. We thought she was just giving us, wanted to frighten us. We couldn't believe it. But then a day after and a day after, we believed it, and we heard the cries of Shema Israel. And we heard children cry. And then we have seen people coming from the train stations and disappear. And we had to stand outside for 3 days. And at the end of the 3rd day, we got some soup. It was horrible. It was atrocious. I didn't want to eat it. And my sister said, "Just eat it." And we ate it. And in that soup there was medication. Medication to make us not to have our periods anymore. Of course, at the time I didn't know it. And after the 3rd day we were put into the block C, in the barrack C, 10, number 10. And they gave us 1 blanket for 5 girls. And the roll call always for 5. And we were 4 of us, my 2 cousins, my sister and myself. It was a good feeling that the 4 of us were together. And of course there were selections. There were many nights that we jumped out the window of the block, because when we saw that Mengele is coming to select, because there was always selections. There were some mothers that remained with the children, with the daughter. There was even a pregnant woman in our block.
Were there any young children, 7, 8 years old?
No, not a one. There was a mother and a daughter in our block. And then one night they were selected, and she was taken away even though she was young. And there was a pregnant woman, and she went in labor, and the baby was born in the block. On the floor, without an anesthesia, naturally. And she gave birth to the child. And the girls cut the umbilical cord. And then they told her, "We have to give the child away, because if they find out, then they'll take you with her, or maybe all of us." And they said, "You're the mother. Do with that whatever you want." And she said, "There's nothing I can do." Anyway, the blocker tester, Raised
the baby?
Yeah, she took the child, I believe. I don't know what they did. Took it away. And the girl was with us, the mother. Of course, and we had to go out to roll call, and she was bleeding, and the girls were trying to wipe it. And I don't know how, but she made it. And there were men who came to clean the latrines in Auschwitz, because there were no bathrooms in the block, in the barrack. They took us by divisions to the bathroom, not when the people had to go to the bathroom, If you had to go, you just made do. You didn't go. Twice a day, they took us to the latrine. The latrine was a ditch dug and a piece of log laid down on it, and you sit on it, and that's how you take care of your needs. In the front of the supervision, SS boys. And the men came and cleaned the latrines. They called them the Scheißkommando. And we thought that, they have it so good because they can come into the lager and they could see and maybe they can find someone. And of course, you could imagine thousands and thousands of girls shouting, "Where are you from? Have you seen my father? Have you seen my brother? What part of Hungary are you from? Who are you?" Because you couldn't recognize the men even if it was one of your family. They were beyond recognition. They were dried out. They were skinny. They didn't look like human beings anymore. And they had the striped suits on and the striped hat. And they pushed the cart. They cleaned the latrines. That was our only connection with the men in Auschwitz. And of course, we didn't find anybody. They didn't know any of our family. And one day my cousin came over from, you couldn't even go across the Lagerstrasse. Across the Lagerstrasse meant, the barracks were on the left side and barracks were on the right side. And you weren't allowed to cross. And everything was, holding against you. If they find you did something, then everybody had to suffer. Or they had hanging in Auschwitz, and you had to witness the hanging. And there were partisan girls who were trying to escape. They were electrocuted, and they showed us, you see, this is what's going to happen to you. If you have any desire or any meanings that you want to escape, there's no escape. And we saw then that there was no escape. And one Sunday, this cousin of mine from Miskolc, she was across from the other barrack. And she sent a message that she has 2 pieces of bread for us. She heard that we were there, that I should somehow go over and get the 2 pieces of bread. Bread was something that we didn't see already for a week and a half. And I managed to go over across. And I remember I fell across the tracks. And I made a big dash on my shin. The mark is still there, and the blood was gushing out. And it didn't stop me. I went and I saw her, and she gave me 2 pieces of bread and butter. And I brought the bread back, and I have never seen her again. She also has never come back. I don't know what happened to her. I came back and I was bleeding, and my sister was worried. If they see the blood is coming, that's the end, they'll take you. So she tore a piece of my dress and she tied my leg up. Then I started to cough because it was very cold and humid in Auschwitz, 2 o'clock in the morning when you had to go out and stand in roll cars. And before the Aufseherin came and counted us, she was trying to hold me in the back to give me some warmth. She was afraid if I get pneumonia or if they hear I cough that, they'll take me away. Because any excuse to take away, it was fine. And they noticed it right away. So I was trying not to cough, and I succeeded. And for some place she found a piece of blanket. I don't know where she found it. And put it on my back in between my dress and my shirt, so it should keep me warm. So this was this support. Because if I was myself, I don't think I would have ever made it. But of course, it was luck anyway. And we were trying not to be separated. And we were in Auschwitz only for 2 weeks. We didn't even get numbers on our arms. We were in a gypsy lager. And from there they took us to Riga. We went to Riga in Kaiserwald.
The four of you?
The four of us.
When you were leaving, what did you think?
We thought it's the last. You know, they take us to the gas. Every time. From then on, every time there was a leaving, I always told my sister, or every time when they take us into a bathhouse, I told her this is the last thing, and just let's say goodbye. This is it. I never thought we ever going to survive. It didn't look like that anyone could ever go out of that hell. There's no way. And I think their aim was that there should be no survivors. We went to Kaiserwald in Riga. There was so many people there. So many people. There were Lithuanian people and Polish people, you know. One big stable, it was like an estate, was devoted for the prisoners. And us Hungarian girls were in one group, about 3,000 of us. And they put us in a haystack on top of the, you know, the space between in the house, the roof, under the, you know, there's a space, and that's where we stayed. That's where we slept. And the next morning when we got up, we were full of lice, because who knows how many thousands of people were there prior to us. And I have never seen lice in my life, you know, in clothing or anything. I see some white things moving, you know, when I folded my dress up, and I asked my sister, what is this? She says, oh my God, this is lice. And gosh, now we're going to get some disease, and that's it, you know. We tried to pick the lice off, you know, to clean ourselves. And then they took us to work. They took us out in the fields, and we dug grass squares, and it was very hot. It was in June. I had my sweet 16 in Auschwitz, by the way. June 20th is my birthday. That was my sweet 16 party. My mother made me a birthday party when I was 12. And she said, wait until you get 16. So I was wondering I said, my God, what she could feel now. She wasn't able to do anything anymore. And we cut grass squares, and we had to carry them on a carrier. And the heat was very, very intense. And my sister cannot take the heat at all. And I was trying to make her sit down in the shade when it was her turn to carry the grass. And my cousin as well. My other cousin also. She was older than her sister. And we made a promise that whatever we can help, that we're going to do instead of them, if we have the chance. So I made her sit down in the shade, and I carried her share too. Really, I see no purpose. I have seen any purpose of our work whatsoever. They said that they're using the grass squares for camouflaging the German tanks. So in the morning when we went out and we picked the lice off of us, we were clean. And then when we came back at night, we had to sleep in the same place. So the next morning we got up again. It's like you lay down with lice, you wake up with lice. And the lice was worming. It was all over. And one morning they took us to the Baltic Sea, because Riga is near the Baltic Sea. And then again we had to get undressed because we only had one dress. There was no change. But anyway, and they bathed us in the ocean. So that was the way of keeping us clean for the moment. And then one day they said that they're going to take us away from Auschwitz. And they made us walk to Vidau.
You mean from Kaiserwald?
Yes, from Kaiserwald. From Kaiserwald, yes. And we walked from Kaiserwald, from Riga, to Vidau. It was a very big ammunition warehouse. It was loaded with ammunition. And they had to retreat because the Russians were coming close. So they told us to load us up. We could take all the marmalade and all the bread that was there for the German army, because we're going to go back to Germany, so we can take all the food we want. We can eat all we want. So everybody was trying to grab. We had no way to carry or anything. So we picked up the marmalade in one hand and we dropped the bread on the other. We picked up the bread, we dropped the marmalade. It was just, and they were mocking, to see us how we grabbed the food. There was no way of carrying it, and we were walking. Whatever we could, we got. And as we were walking, we heard the warehouse blown up. They blew up the warehouse because they didn't want to leave the ammunition, I suppose, in the Russian hands. And we were walking, and we just had to drop whatever we had. So for the momentary excitement of getting hold of some food after so long, it was just a mockery, another episode. And everybody just had to, because you can't walk and carry. And from there we went to Dundanga. In Dundanga they separated us, my two cousins, my sister and I. And we thought this is the end, because we cannot be separated. We have to be together as much as we can. And my sister was in a different group lined up, and I was in a different group. And my two cousins remained in the block in Dundanga, in that barrack, already picked to stay there. So my sister, I saw her walk out from her row, and Eichmann was there standing, turned around, and I saw her face when she saw me that I was separated. And I knew, if they catch you, you just don't know what happens. You cannot do anything against the rule, and especially the SS, and where we were in it. But I just had to. So they turned their faces, and I just ran. And of course, it wasn't the strength of my sister. I would have never had the energy to, or the will to even to step out. So we went together again, and we remained in Dundanga. And they took those girls that were standing out there, about 3,000 of them, and they never came back. The rows where I was standing, none of the girls ever came back. They didn't live. I don't know what happened to them. The rumor was that they took them to sea and they dumped them. There were people from my neighboring towns. There were girls from, I know a lot of girls. Nobody came back. And from Dundanga we went to Stutthof and Stuttgart. And every time we got into the concentration camps, you see the totem poles on the corner, the electric wire around it, and the sign Arbeit macht frei, that work sets you free. One lies on top of the other. And every concentration that they have taken us in, they've taken us into to give us a bath. They gave us a bath, and in Stuttgart, and they made us go outside and sit down in the dust. There were millions of people sitting there, waiting to be probably gassed and distributed and whatever. And we were sitting there in the dust, and we just have given a bath. So it was just all done so purposefully to inflict hurt and to inflict if more hurt they can give you, and then more senseless things that anyone who could think that try to put the pieces together, what makes sense and doesn't make sense. And from Stuttgart, they put us on a train and they took us to Leipzig, 500 of us.
What year is this now?
Pardon me?
What year is this now?
That was in still October 44. October 44, and they took us to Leipzig. 500 young girls. And we were together, the four of us together, and they took us into a camp right outside of Leipzig. And
what kind of camp was this?
It was just fenced around with electrical wires. It was a work camp. The SS commando had the front part fenced around for them, and 500 girls had barracks, and this was our space designed for working, for us. Anyway, I don't know what was before. Excuse me. And they said, you're going to work in an airplane factory. 1 week daytime and 1 week nighttime. And if you're not going to do your job the way you were told, it will be sabotage, and everyone will suffer for it. If any one of you will try to escape, everyone will suffer for it. And there was only 500 of us. We were fenced around, and we were watched like criminals, We were criminals. We were just children of Jewish parents. And we went to work in that ATG in an airplane factory. I was shooting rivets with a Lufthammer, an air hammer, into a piece that goes into the airplane from the machine, the front of the airplane. And when you completed, you have to drill the holes and you have to shoot the rivets in them, and then they were in there. If it wasn't straight, you had to take it out. It had to be just so. And of course, I was always very efficient. I was brought up to do right.
What were you thinking working in this factory?
I was just thinking that if I do my job right, that maybe we will be all right, and maybe we will be okay, and nothing is going to happen to any of us. And of course, as long as we were in one place, we felt a sense of security. The minute we were moved, we always thought that's going to be the end. But as long as we were in one place, we had no other thoughts than just to try to obey the rules and try to do right and just keep above whatever we have and to do away with, and whatever little food we have to try to manage not to eat it at one time, so we have it for all day or for all week. And we just do our job, what we're told, and we didn't know. That again, you didn't know what's going to happen or whatever. So we went to work. 1 week we worked daytime and 1 week we worked nighttime. My sister and I, we were in the day shift the week, and we were always together, and my 2 other cousins were together. We worked upstairs, and my 2 cousins worked downstairs. They were working in the sheet metal section, cutting the pieces for the airplane. And some girls were working in the assembly hall, and some girls, every part of the factory. And to each 5 girls, there were a meister given, who led us and showed us how to work, but he wasn't supposed to talk to us. It was degrading for a German to talk to a Jewish girl. And in that factory, there were Italian political prisoners, men working downstairs. And of course, they were not going with German SS officers. They were allowed to come on their own. They were in the political camps. Nobody was as severely punished as the Jews. And the Jewish men were treated a lot worse than the Jewish women yet. And us, we were very lucky because we worked, and comparatively, if everybody was on that condition that we were, my sister and I and my two cousins, a lot of more people would have survived. And then one day, that was in 45, they came and bombed. Every time that the American the bombers came to bomb Leipzig, we were just so thrilled. We had to go out in the ditch, to save ourselves. It's like a joke. And then when the bombers came, my sister always, we had a little piece of bread because we arranged it so we should have it. It should last for all week. We got one bread and a slice a day. And we see that we wouldn't eat more than what allotment for the day, so we have it every day. And of course, none of us would take anyone's portion, not even a crumb. My sister always knew that, I love to eat and I'm always hungry. She always wanted to give me some of her portion, but I would never take not one crumb. There's no way. She said, I'm not hungry. I said, well, then just leave it there. So when we went out at night, when they were bombing, she brought the piece of bread. She says, let's eat it, so at least we don't die hungry. I says, no. I says, don't eat it. I says, I can't eat. The bombs are falling and I can't eat. And Leipzig was in flames and we were just so happy. Every time then the alarm sounded, we were just so happy because we always welcomed to die by an American bomb or by a Russian bomb instead of the German solution, because we didn't know what the end is going to be. We knew that probably the end is that we'll get killed. So we survived all that. And then one day, our lager was bombed. And we were coming home from work, and my two cousins were sleeping. And the roof fell in where my cousin was sleeping, right next to her. And nothing happened to her. And we were worried, and as we walked into the lager, there were lighting bombs, at the steps that you walked by. So we had to be careful where you step. And I was running to see whether they're alive, because the lager was in just bombed to pieces. The girls were standing outside. And we had some 500 other girls that they brought in just a few days ago. When their lager was bombed down, they brought us to stay with us. And 2 of them was killed. None from our group was hurt by the bomb. And my sister was with me, and my 2 cousins were fine. They were alive, so that was our greatest happiness, that they weren't hurt. And this is how life was. I got some premium, because I worked so good, some premium money that I could buy extra lettuce or something. It was a French salad or something.
You were paid?
Yes, we were paid premiums. And we got a letter like the aerogram, you have
Yes.
here, that we can write to Auschwitz and write to our parents. Could you imagine?
What did you do with that piece of paper?
We wrote. We wrote. And we were thinking that they mailed them away to them. We wrote them that we are okay.
Did you believe that they would be delivered?
I had no idea. I had no idea. I haven't witnessed personally that my mother was gassed. I couldn't imagine that a woman of her caliber and of her level could be killed just because she was Jew. I couldn't imagine that all those people were killed. However, we thought maybe she's alive somewhere. So we wrote the letter. We thought Auschwitz was the center. That's where the letter had to be addressed. And we thought that they will deliver it to her.
What did you write?
They told us what to write. They told us that we're working, and we are fine, and we are okay. That's all what you were allowed to write. And I'm here with my sister, and we hope to see you. And that was that. And then in one day, the lagerärteste Isa came in, and she was working with the Hauptscharführer because she knew German, she knew several languages. And she was the mediator, between us and the Hauptscharführer, the commander, to give us the word and whatever we have to do. We had a washroom with cold water, and we were able to get washed every night. And you were not allowed to go out of your room at a certain hour in the evening. We had a black coffee in the morning. We got up 4 o'clock every morning when we worked daytime. However, it was enough to survive. If everyone had that much, then we wouldn't have more survivors. And then they said one day that we're going to have to liquidate the lager. That was in 1945, April. That the Americans are on one side, about 10 kilometers away, and the Russians are on the other side. And one girl among us 500 got crazy. And she was in the infirmary. She was screaming all the time on top of her lung. At the time she was tied down. And many, many nights when we went for the supper, I just couldn't even look at that way because she was so beautiful. And she was just so mentally sick. She screamed and she sang The Roses Bloom. The roses will bloom for you. It was just, tearing your heart away. And I don't know why she was remained in the camp to the last minute, whether that we should see this, daily, or out of compassion, I don't know. So the day that we liquidated the camp, the Hauptscharführer said that the Oberscharführer is going to shoot her because we cannot take her with us. And he did. As we were leaving, we heard the shots. So all of us mourned deeply. Firstly, we mourned because she was sick. She didn't have the mental strength. Secondly, we mourned because she was a sister. And the girl, her sister, was just torn apart. She was yelling, "Shoot me too. Don't leave me. Don't let me live." And we mourned for her. We were taken out of the lager. And we started to walk. And we didn't know where we were going again. We walked. We had no food. We had nothing to drink. At one time, when the Americans came down and they machine gunned, and they said, "You lay on your stomach so they could see your numbers, because if they see you are Häftlingers, prisoners, they wouldn't shoot." And the Germans ran in the ditch so they couldn't see them, because they knew if they see them, they will shoot. And that's true, they didn't shoot. They came down all the way, those planes. They ditched down all the way to the lowest level, and they lifted up. They saw who we are. And at one time I was trying to go and get some water in a river. They shot after me. The bullet was going by my wrist. But I didn't care. I felt I want to get some water. And I made it back again, and a row of girls, at least 5 of them, had a drink. I felt so strong. I felt that I could walk forever. And this is what I felt. I felt that this is me going to do, walk forever, because there was no way out. But in intervals of 6 feet, there was a soldier. There was no way of escape. There was nowhere to escape. And it was another escape would be very hard because the 4 of us together. I wouldn't leave my sister. My cousins wouldn't leave. We wouldn't leave one another, and it was impossible for 4 people even to conceive the idea. So we just felt we will walk forever.
Were you hopeful at this point?
There was no hope. We didn't know. And then after the end of 2 weeks, between Leipzig and Würzen, there were a jeep with 2 American soldiers, 18 years old, machine guns on their shoulders, chewing gum. I've never seen chewing gum. I never knew what gum is. And they liberated us. And I don't know, again, we took off our shirt. It was white, and stick it up on a pole so they shouldn't shoot. They shouldn't, we said, that we give ourselves up because we are prisoners. They shouldn't think that we are Germans.
Where were the guards?
And the guards at that time tore all their rank off, and they threw their guns away, and they were begging us to change clothes with them. They were taking off their jackets. They wanted to tear their identity. They knew that this is the end, and this is it. And they liberated us, the 2 American 18-year-olds.
How many women were you now?
499. And then they said, "You're free now. What do you want to do?" I looked at my sister, and she looked at me, and she says, "I told you." And they said, "What do you want to do?" And we said, "We just want to sit down." Our feet were full of blisters from walking. And we sat down. I don't know how long we sat there. And then they said that we're going to take you in a house, and you get food, and you get clothes.
The 2 soldiers?
Yes. Because this is our order. And that's what they did, and gathered up the German soldiers. And they took them away. And we were free. And they took us into Würzen, in a house, and the first thing done was that we took a bath. We were full of dust, our feet were full of blisters. And they brought us food, all kinds of food, but we couldn't eat. And of course, again, my sister, she said, even if you could eat, you have to be careful what we're going to eat now. Because if we're going to eat fast, and we're going to eat greasy food, or, after a year almost, she said, we can get sick. And many girls died after the liberation because they didn't have a sister, or they didn't have the discipline of being careful. We took a bath, and we lay down and slept. I don't know how long we slept. And we was free. We were free. And then my sister said, we were there a few days, and then it became the demarcation line, Würzen, and the Americans had to go out. And the Russians came in. And it started an agony all over again. They wanted to rape us. And we told them we just came from the concentration camp. We're Jewish prisoners. We just got liberated. What do you want of us? And they just said a few cuss words and who cares and all that stuff. And so what we did, we tied our neck with a kerchief and we pulled our hair down and we made believe that we're sick, and we put a sign outside the room that this is a sick room, so they should be afraid to come in. And we stand vigil, one of us all night, to see if they're coming, because certainly we didn't want to be raped. After all that. So one of the girls who spoke Russian, one night she was entertaining a Russian officer all night, and he was a high-ranking officer. But he was just terrible. But she spoke Russian, and she kept him in conversation all night until the morning came. And then by the morning came, they became more civil. At night, they were like animals. So then my sister said, and I told my sister, there's nothing to do here. We were 3 days already liberated in Würzen. And I said, we have to go back to my little town. Because if any one of us, anyone from our family is alive, we're certainly not going to meet them in the middle of Germany. Maybe my mother is free, maybe my brother is free, maybe my father. We were hoping to find somebody. I had the hope to find everybody. So there was no way to go. There was no papers. We had no papers. We had nothing, no identification. But again, I just said we have to go, no matter how. And somehow we got to Vienna. And Vienna, we boarded a train. We walked, yes. Vienna? We walked, and then we got a ride. We managed. I said, we have to get away from these Russians because they're going to kill us. And we got to Vienna. We got on the train, and it said to Budapest, Sátoraljaújhely, and the train was so loaded. There was no room on the train. I pushed my cousins and my sister up, and I stood on the steps. And I stood out there all night. And, the sparks came from the front of the train, and I was afraid my hair shouldn't get on fire, whatever. But I managed, and we arrived in Budapest the next morning. And I said to myself, why are we coming back? Where are we going back? What is here? In a place where they took us away. But I said to myself, the only reason we're coming back is to find our family. And my cousin said that my brother, he was in Budapest. Maybe he's still here. Let's go and look for him. And we got off the train and we started to look for my cousin without an address. Budapest was bombed to pieces. We were happy to see that. And we were walking and finding and asking people. And we find someone on the street who knew him. He said, yes, he's here in such and such a location. And we went there to find him. Could you imagine the reunion?
Can you describe him?
Well, he just didn't want to believe it, and he just was frozen and cried and didn't know who to hug first, and he was very happy. And he said, what can I do for you? And he was telling us the ordeal that he went through. And he said, but there was nothing like you did. And I'm so thankful that you're here. And we are all one. He had one room. He says we could all stay here forever. And we stayed there for about a week. And my sister and I, we said that we're not going to take advantage on him to support us. We're young and we're healthy. We're going back to Tolcsva. And maybe our parents will come back there. And we went back to Tolcsva and got on the train. He gave us money to get on the train. I remember the station when we got on. That's the station where we went away from. And there was 3 kilometers from the station to Tolcsva. And there was a big hill, you had to walk by there was a settlement. There was one of the man who owned a lot of property in Tolcsva, the Baro. His help was living there. And as we were walking, and I said to my sister, the fields were green on either side. And life was going on. There were birds singing, and there were flowers, and people going about their businesses. And we were coming to the cross. There was a cross at the Greek church. It says, "Peace be with you." And I said to myself, what peace, And I said, do they still believe in that? Well, my sister didn't answer me. She didn't say anything. And we've seen people coming out of the houses that were Jewish people and my friends used to live. They moved in. And we went further, and then I said to my sister, I wish I could have a gun, a machine gun, and just machine gun the whole city down, the whole village, just one after another. I don't think I could have done it, but I had the feeling that I would like to do that. And then, as we were meeting people on the street, I never forget, one man said, "Where's your father?" I says, "What do you mean, where's my father?" I says, "He's on vacation." I wouldn't tell him. I says, "Don't you know it?" I says, "Didn't you miss him all this time?" "Did you see my father yesterday?" "No." I said, "Did you see him last week? Did you see him last month?" I said, "Now you're asking me where my father is?" And I just turned away. And we went to our house. It was smeared with swastika. It was dug up. It was a stable. It was empty. Nobody was missed, Life was going on. I said to them, "Where is the rabbi?" I says, "that you thought so much of." I says, "And where is the lawyer that who took care of your legal affairs? And where is the doctor," I says, "who cured you? Who sewed you up after your rebels? When you had a game and you had a party, and when you knifed one another?" I says, "Where is the man who fixed your pots and pans?" And I says, "Where is our teacher and his family?" And I says, "Where is that man who used to ridicule? They used to say dirty words after him. There was an old bachelor in town who never married, and he was torn and poor, and everybody that gave him a glass of wine he drank." I says, "Where is he? Even he was taken away." He says, "What did he bother you?" I says, "No one is missed." I says, "Where is the man? When there was a fire, there was one Jewish man in that village that he cut the roof in two. And my father was so proud of him. He said, 'Fool, cut the roof again and save the house. Because if you cut the roof, on the top, then the fire wouldn't spread.' I says, 'Where is Fool?' I says, 'Who is cutting the roofs now when you have a fire?' I says, 'You don't miss anybody?' He says, 'It's fine.' I says, 'Living is fine and you live in peace.' I says, 'It says on your church to live in peace.' He says, 'What kind of peace do you have? And you asking me where my father is?' He says, 'Look at my house. It's dug up. It's smeared with swastika. It was a stable.' I says, 'Why?' And that was that. So my sister and I, we lay down in that empty house on the floor and we fell asleep. Got up the next morning and I find my girlfriend, Zsuzsi. Her hair didn't grow back and she was, ammunition factory somewhere. And she didn't have hair and she looked swollen. She was in a terrible condition and she was so happy to see me. She says, "Can I stay with you? Because I'm all alone." We were alone too, but we were the two of us. And we said, "Surely." So we stayed in that empty house, the three of us. And then a couple of weeks later, they had a kitchen. They opened and a few more came back to Tolcsva, about 5 or 6. And the Jewish organization, opened a kitchen.
Which one?
Now, I think it was the UNRWA. And they opened a kitchen for food, to feed us. And I went to the man who used to take care of vineyards, and he used to take care of fruit trees. He offered, food and drink, and I says, "No, I don't want your food, and I don't want your drink." I says, "You didn't offer any compassion. You didn't offer any help then. I don't want your food now. I can do without it." And then I said to him, I says, "How come that you love my father so much, that you couldn't hide him, or you couldn't hide one of us?" I says, "What did you feel when they take us away?" He says, "It was a law. You can't go against the law." I says, "I remember my mother telling me there's always a little door near the big door. And if you want, you can do something." I says, "I hope you can live with this all your life. But you live," I says. "You're lucky. And if you can feel that way," I says, "fine." I had nothing else to tell you, and I just walked away. I wouldn't take any bread from him. And we went to eat on that kitchen. And then I told my sister, "We're not going to stay here and get handouts." I see 2 weeks, 3 weeks, nobody came back. 4 weeks, nobody came back. And I said, "We have to start to do something." And my girlfriend had some cigarette paper. I don't know where she got it from. And I took the cigarette paper and I sold it. I sold it for some preserves. And I took the preserves and went to Budapest and sold the preserves, and I bought shoes in Budapest and brought it back. And I started trading like that because I said, I don't want to take any handouts. And one night I was on a train and I had a little rucksack on my back, a backpack. All my belongings were there. And the Russian soldier wanted to take it away from me. And I said to him, "You cannot take that away." I didn't know Russian. I just know a few words. And, they thought I was Russian because I was rosy-cheeked. And I don't know why they thought I was Russian. He said, "I just don't want to speak Russian." I says, "No, I don't know Russian." And then he turned away and I jumped out of the window. And I went into the other compartment. So then got to Budapest and came back again. And then after a few weeks, we got a telegram from the Red Cross that your brother Itsu is alive in Paris. So by then I had about American $100. I had a coat made for my sister, with fur lined, so she should be warm. And I made myself a pair of pants and a jacket. And I said, "We're going to Paris." I said, "This is what I was waiting for, because you're certainly not going to stay here. I will not make any life for here among these people." She said, "How do you think we're going to Paris? We have nothing and no papers. How are you going to go?" I said, "Just don't worry about it." And we went back to Budapest. And They said, you cannot get papers, you cannot legal. I says, if we're not going legally, we're going illegally. So what? And my sister and I, we walked through the Russian border to the American zone, through Austria, one night. With some other people, with a whole group. And the boots that I had made for her, that I thought is going to be good, rubbed her feet off, a big blister. And then when we arrived in Austria, she had to take it off. It was all swollen. And we had to carry her. And there we went again to the UNRWA. And they let us stay there. There was a house. And we had to get a doctor. So the last $20 that I had, I gave it to the doctor. And she said, well, you're lucky because she almost has blood poisoning, you know, from the blister. Her foot was swollen. And we stayed there until she got better. And I said, we have to go to Paris. So we went. Back. You can get tickets on a military train. I said, well, if you don't get tickets, you go without tickets. And we had a letter from the UNRWA. You know, I asked them to give me a letter, and it was written in English, and I didn't know what was in there. I just made up my own story. And they asked me, where are you going? I says, we belong to the American Army. Here's the letter. And my brother is a chaplain in the army, and we're going to see him. Nothing of that sort in that letter, you know, and they didn't know English. And there was a bedroom, you know, for the officers, a compartment. I said to my sister, great, now we're going to travel in style for a change. And I made her comfortable in there. And then they came and they said, you have to go out of here because this is the officers' compartment. So my sister was afraid they're going to throw us off the train again. I said, don't worry. You're not with Russians anymore and you're not with Germans anymore. I'm not worried anymore. I felt safe as anything on that train. That's the first time that I felt safe. So they made us go into the third class and just sit on the benches with the soldiers. And we did. And we talked to this soldier all night, and he gave us about 100 francs to move around in Paris. And we arrived in the Gare Saint-Lazare in Paris. And there again we didn't know where my brother is. You know, I got 2 letters from him. And I felt, you know, my common sense said that the letter that with the latest date, and that address that he should be. But it turned out it wasn't that way. So again, we got on the train without tickets. And in the station, we slept, you know, made us lay down on the floor and sleep. I said, you got to get some rest. And we went to look for him. And I had a picture of him. And I asked everybody, you know, I took it for granted everybody knows my brother. I mean, who wouldn't know him in Paris? And we had to go all the way down on the south of France, you know, that address was. The address. And we went there, and by the time we arrived there, he wasn't there. Turned out that they were near Paris. So we came back again, and the guy said again on the train station, you cannot get on the train without money, without ticket. I said, okay, fine. So when the train came, I pushed my sister up, and we mounted the train. You know, there was no for me. No obstacles for me. And ticket didn't matter to me. I felt I don't do anything. All I want is just to get to my brother, and so what, ticket or no ticket. And he says, don't you worry, you know. He wanted to pull me off, and I gave him a kick. I says, forget it, to myself. And he says, on the next big station, they're going to take you down and put you in jail. And I motioned to him, are they going to let me sleep and give me food to eat? Fine. I says, let them put me in jail. And that was that. We arrived in Paris, and I went to a police at the station. And I told him, showed him the letter again. I says, what is this? You know, I want to have to look for my brother. And then they asked, who are we? You know, and there were posters all over the station. There were posters all over the city with Häftlingers with the striped uniform, you know, talking about the survivors and talking about the concentration camp. And I always showed them, this is what we are. You know, I didn't know the language. And then he took us over to the other station where the address was from the Garden Nord. And then I met a boy, you know, that I told my sister, he looks like one of us, you know, a Häftlinger, one of the survivors. And I went to him and asked him if he speaks Hungarian. He said yes. And I took the picture out right away and I showed him. I said, do you know this fellow? He said, sure, it's there with us in the house. I can't describe you that moment. And then we got on the train to Taverny from Garden Nord. And that was a big castle. It was donated to the Œuvre Sécureuse Enfants in France,
right.
You know, for the
right.
survivors.
Right.
And we walked from the train, and that short distance was so long because I just wanted to see my brother so badly. And he says, don't worry, he's okay, and he's there with us, and you'll be staying there. And they were only boys. And we arrived, and he ran in, and he called my brother out, and he was just running as fast as he could. And he embraced us. And he said he was very sick after the liberation, and he was together with my father.
Where were they?
He was in Flossenburg, you know, during the concentration camp. And he was swollen, and his tooth was missing. And his feet were swollen. He had slippers on. But however, he was there. And he took us in and he explained it. And he said that he survived with my father, and they took him to France. That's why he's there, from Flossenburg, the Red Cross. And they took blood from my father, gave him transfusions. I never understand why they took blood from a man in that condition. I have no answers for that neither. And he died 2 weeks after liberation. And he was well. He died from the needles infections. He got hepatitis. So he says he's lucky that he wasn't well enough to sense the feeling of his survival through my father's blood. He says, but there's nothing he can do now. And he took us the following week down to his grave, where he's buried in France. And they said that there were no girls in that house. It was in Taverny. But they're going to make a success that we'll be able. They're going to arrange that we should stay there with my brother. And we stayed in there, in Taverny. That was in 1945.
There was another brother.
The other brother was gassed. He was 14 years old. And he was gassed in Auschwitz. He didn't have a chance to leave an imprint of his life or his existence. And we stayed in Taverny. And then, of course, we started to learn French, because being in a country, you have to learn the language. There was a teacher who was teaching us, and later on that I thought I can manage with the French. I said, I want to go to school. And then I went to Sorbonne. I wanted to become somebody to give some contribution.
What kind of contribution were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking of some kind of research, perhaps. It's all I was thinking. I could never understand why my father died. I guess I was ignorant. I didn't know the facts, that when they take blood from a man who is in another condition, and he could die of the infection of the needles. And I just wanted to research and to be able to do some good to humanity.
After all this, you wanted to do some good.
That's right. And of course, we had to live with the thoughts, that we didn't have our period for almost a year. And if we are alive and we survived, what will happen? Would we ever marry? Would we have a family? Would we be able to conceive children? And if yes, in what condition? So we lived in fear. And of course, we suffered we have the scars. And my brother said that I want that we should go to the United States. We had an aunt. She was my father's oldest sister, and she came to the United States when she was 16 years old. And he said that he got somehow through the organizations in connection with her, and she's not able to send us papers to sign that we will not be a burden of the government. But she will get in touch with my mother's first cousin in Reading, Pennsylvania, who are doctors, both of them, who came out before the war, and they will send us the papers, the affidavit, to come out. And my sister and I, we were under 21, and we were stateless. So he decided that we should sign up to the Czechoslovakian quota, because there were no Hungarian quota that time, in 1945. And he said he will come later because he was over 21. He couldn't come with us. So we were granted the visa. And my sister and I, we came to this country in 1947, in April. And our cousin picked us up, who didn't know us, but of course anyone could recognize two refugee girls at the shores. And when we came off the boat, I told my sister we were driving to Pennsylvania, and I saw these beautiful highways and the advertisements. I said, we are in the United States. And as we were, our boat were approaching the Statue of Liberty, I took my coat that I had from the concentration camp and I threw it in the ocean. And people said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Certainly," I said, "we are now in America and I will be able to buy a new coat. I don't want to see this anymore." And we were driving down to Pennsylvania, and he stopped and he went to, I felt like Peter Pan, I wanted to fly. I says, "We're free in a free country." And of course, the tragedy was that there were no parents and there were no younger brother of mine. And we knew that this is it. And we just have to reestablish ourselves to society, and life has to go on. Just because we cannot give in. Because we are here as a witness. And we have to assure, and especially we came to this country, this new country that we adopted, that we don't want to be a burden, we want to give contributions, because we survived. Our survival has a purpose. And again, we were in Reading, Pennsylvania, and we were there 3 days. And we told our cousins that they were so nice to help us here that we want to go back to New York because we don't want to take anything from them. They already have given us enough. And we are young and we're healthy. We can go to work and make a livelihood for ourselves. They were very reluctant to let, two girls out in the life without the language, without any knowledge. But I had no fear. I had no problem. He drove us back to New York. And there was one of this boy who came to this country before us. And we were in touch with him. And that was Menashe Klein. And he was a Klausenberger Bocher, and he lived by the Klausenberger rabbi in Brooklyn. And we notified him that we're coming to New York, and he waited for us. And they put us up in a house that the Klausenberger had. There was a house in Brooklyn on top of a shul, a room. There was nothing there, it was 2 beds there. And we went to sleep, and there was bugs in the bed. And there was a lot of dust and everything. We got up and boiled water and washed the beds. And my sister said, I said, my God. She said, what is this? She says, what a wonderful place. I said, well, don't worry about it. Everything is going to be all right, so we'll clean it. And that's how we started. And the following week we went to work. I went into the garment center, took a subway, and then when I see a sign, but it says, girl wanted, they had signs out on every door. I walked in, and I worked on many, many different jobs. T-shirt factory, umbrella factory.
And your brother?
And my brother was still in Europe. He didn't come until a year after. And then when he came, I felt I was already well Americanized. I spoke some English very well, as a fact, because I went to night school. I knew right away that I have to learn the language. No one spoke French here, because I spoke fluent French. And I went to Washington Irving High, and I learned English. And we were working. And he came a year after as a student. And then he remained here. Then we lived together in Brooklyn. And I was the first one who got married. And my brother went to shul in Williamsburg, and he saw this man. He was a very nice-looking man. He knew I like good-looking boys. So he gave him my number to call me up. And he called me up, and we had a blind date. And 2 weeks after, he asked me to marry him. I said, why didn't you ask me sooner?
You weren't in a hurry.
Anyway, I felt he looks strong. He's got good ideas, and he has ambition. And after all, what else is there? All you need is ambition and some stamina to go on. And he was Hungarian. He was Kisvárda. He comes from Kisvárda. And of course, I would have never known him if things were under natural circumstances. But that's how we met, and we married May 28, 1950. Mm. And then we had our first child, Cornelia, 1951, October 7th. And we started to work. He came to this country in 49, and the week after he was working. And we worked, and we saved every penny we could. And then we had Mitchell, who was born in 1954. And we lived in New York. He worked nighttime on a job painting, and daytime he worked in factories, so he could make some more money. And I worked until 8 months of my pregnancy with Connie, my first child. And when she was born, we lived on the top floor. It was so hot there. I remember we used to go up on the roof, and he tied the child to his foot so she shouldn't roll off the roof. was so hot we couldn't sleep in the room. And then he got some. We had about $1,500 saved, and he said he's going into business. He bought a sewing machine, and he went into business with a. I said, certainly. He said, I'm not going in alone because I don't want to lose. If I lose this $1,500, then I lost everything. And he had a partner, and they grew, and they made some more, and then one day there was a fire and everything burned down, the whole factory, and we had to start all over again. And then we did pretty good. I still worked again, and then we saved, and I always thought that if I have children, I should bring them up in pleasant surroundings, and we should buy a home, so they should grow up with security. So we went out to Long Island and bought a small home, and he commuted. He was in the stitching business. And then in 1959, he had a friend in South Carolina. We went to visit him. And he said there was a small factory for sale in Nashville. We should go over and see. And we rode over there, and the scenery was very nice, geographically, and it was like a small town. And I told him maybe it would be better to bring children up in a smaller town. It would be easier. But let's move here. So that meant we had to sell our little home and the business and start again. That's what we did. And we lived there ever since. And then Vivian made her appearance in 1960. And Joseph, I have 4 children. He's 14 years old. I have wonderful children. So Hitler didn't succeed altogether. I have 4 grandchildren.
4 grandchildren. Oh my.
Connie was married.
I see you have a book in your lap. Could you maybe tell me how it is that you came to write that book?
Yes, well, this is a testimony. This is my personal testimony, and it's a monument. It's a monument for my mother, for my brother, and for the 6 million. Because I felt, it's my personal account, that it will stay here as long as the world will stay here, hopefully forever. And perhaps somewhere, somehow, maybe it will influence someone to avert another Holocaust. Because it's an honest story. It's written, I'm not a professional writer, it's written on a level that even an elementary child could read it, and they could learn what happened, and they could learn about my life, and they could learn about the survivors, and they can contribute the knowledge and continue what we survived for. Because after us, there's no one else. Unfortunately, there is survivors dying every day by accident or by sickness, and no one lives forever. And after us is only going to be history. And it's our responsibility to tell the story in its entirety. But there's so many people that don't know anything about it, and there's so many people that don't want to know about it. And the resurgence of anti-Semitism and terrorism, and this is the only way that will help. If people will know, the more they know and the more want to know about it, they can learn what humanity has done against a fellow man. And it was never precedent in the annals of history, such a mass murder as such as during the Holocaust.
What prompted you to write the book?
And this is why I wrote the book, for a testimony, for a remembrance. And I also wanted to write everything down for my children. Because you talk and you tell them, and they're wonderful children, and they're compassionate, and they know. But you know how it is. The words could go by, but the writings remain. So I wrote it down so they will have it forever.
Mm.
And I'm very committed to the cause. I have everything, thank God. I have wonderful children, a wonderful husband, married 33 years, successful. And I want them to know that to be strong, and for what happened to us, even though we suffered the scars, because we can never forget. I cannot laugh as wholeheartedly as anyone else can laugh, because it takes a whole lot to make me laugh. But wherever I'm sane and I'm strong, I believe I'm sane, and I live a normal life.
Do you have nightmares ever?
I have nightmares. Strangely, the other day I was dreaming about my mother, which I don't often do. And I was dreaming that she came to visit me. She looked so well. She had a fur coat on. And she came to visit me in Asheville. I was under the effect all day. Because I can't even imagine what she looks like anymore. And I have seen her, so true. I was happy I had that dream. The whole life is a dream. Some say that the whole thing was a dream. But unfortunately, people were killed. There is professors and teachers, and there is elements that say that the Holocaust never existed. It was fabricated. I met a woman in my town, and she said to me, don't you read history? That was just fabricated. The Jews made that up so they could make money and take it to Israel. And I said to her, really? It was made up. I said, and where's my people? And I says, did you hear about the Hitler's diary it was just sent out? I says, what do you think that was? He says, that's a joke. That wasn't true. It was false. So I saw I was dealing with a very ignorant person, but this is what the trouble is, ignorance, Ignorance is really our enemies. And that's why I wrote this book too, because, if education is the only thing that we have, and I'm very dedicated to the cause, as I told you before. I'm a member of the Governor's Commission on the Holocaust in North Carolina. I'm the vice chairman in charge of the higher education, and I lecture. I go to the middle schools, I go to the high schools, I go to the colleges, I go to the churches, and I would like to erect a monument in my town because it's a tourist town, and I want the people that come there now, in the future, and forever, so they know, so they see among the other attractions in Asheville that they should see a monument of the Holocaust. I feel it's very important.
I think we're out of tape.
Oh, okay.
You want to put more tape in?
Do you feel as if you would like to continue, or would you like to stop?
It's up to you.
I'm fine.
I think we covered everything.
Okay. I'm fine.